Your soulmate finally confessed their love for you in public. What they said next may surprise you. Watch before it disappears. My beloved child. Do not scroll away from this moment, because something has changed in a place you could not see, and the person your heart has questioned for so long has finally done something they once believed they would never have the courage to do. Stay here, because this is not simply about someone admitting that they have feelings for you. What unfolded was far deeper than a confession. Your name was spoken in a room where it had once been avoided. Feelings that had been protected behind silence were brought into the open. People who thought they understood your soulmate suddenly realized there was an entire part of their heart they had never been allowed to see. And the most extraordinary moment did not come when your soulmate admitted loving you. It came afterward, when someone asked them one simple question and your soulmate gave an answer that made the entire room fall silent. There is a reason this revelation is reaching you now, because for a long time you have been looking at the silence and wondering whether anything existed behind it. You could not see the private battles. You could not hear the conversations they had with themselves. You did not know how many times they almost reached toward you and stopped. But what remained hidden inside them has finally begun demanding a voice. For longer than anyone around them realized, your soulmate had become skilled at pretending. They could laugh while something inside them felt unfinished. They could join conversations about relationships while carefully avoiding your name. They could tell people they were fine while carrying memories of you into quiet nights. Sometimes they even convinced themselves that they had moved beyond what they felt. They would fill their schedule, surround themselves with noise, focus on practical responsibilities, and promise themselves that tomorrow they would think about you less. But tomorrow would arrive, and something small would bring you back. A song. A familiar phrase. A place. A certain hour of the evening. Someone laughing in a way that reminded them of you. A moment of kindness that made them compare another person with the way you once made them feel. And every time you returned to their mind, they discovered the same uncomfortable truth: they had not forgotten you. They had only become better at hiding how deeply you remained within them. What frightened them most was not that they loved you. Somewhere inside, they had known that for longer than they wanted to admit. What frightened them was what loving you required them to confront about themselves. You awakened something in them that ordinary connections never touched. Around others, they could remain protected. They could show exactly as much emotion as they wanted and keep the rest behind a locked door. With you, that became harder. You seemed to reach the places they had spent years teaching themselves to hide. They felt seen by you even when you were not asking questions. Sometimes your silence understood them more deeply than another person's long conversation. Sometimes one look from you made them wonder whether you could see through every defense they had carefully built. That was why they sometimes became distant when closeness seemed possible. You may have interpreted that distance as lack of feeling, but in this fictional story, the truth was almost the opposite. The connection mattered enough to frighten them. They knew that if they allowed themselves to fully acknowledge what they felt, they would no longer be able to pretend you were simply another passing chapter. Then came the gathering that changed everything. It was not arranged for you. No one entered the room expecting a confession. The evening began ordinarily enough, with familiar voices, casual conversations, small laughter, people talking about life and relationships without realizing that one innocent question was about to open a door your soulmate had kept closed for a very long time. Someone made a playful remark about your soulmate always avoiding serious conversations about love. Another person laughed and asked whether there was secretly someone they had never told anyone about. Your soulmate smiled at first. It was the smile they had used many times before, the one that said, "There is nothing to talk about." Usually that would have ended the subject. But this time, someone noticed something different in their eyes. The smile disappeared too quickly. Their attention drifted. Their fingers became still. And one person who knew them well leaned closer and asked again, more seriously, "There really is someone, isn't there?" The room changed. Your soulmate could feel every pair of eyes waiting, yet inside their mind there was only one face. Yours. They remembered moments they had tried to bury. They remembered things you said that they pretended had not affected them. They remembered the times you gave them space when you could have demanded answers. They remembered how often you seemed to care without turning your care into pressure. And then another memory surfaced, one they had been carrying privately for months. It was the memory of a moment when they had almost told you everything and stopped themselves. They remembered watching you walk away from that interaction and wondering whether they had just allowed something irreplaceable to slip through their hands. That memory had followed them. Now, surrounded by people asking whether anyone truly occupied their heart, your soulmate suddenly understood how exhausting it had become to deny the answer. They lowered their eyes and quietly said, "Yes." Nobody laughed after that. Someone asked who. Your soulmate hesitated. They could still escape. They could refuse to answer. They could turn the confession into a joke and rebuild the wall before anyone saw what was behind it. Their heart was pounding because saying your name would make the feeling real outside their own private world. Once spoken, it could not be taken back. People would know. Questions would follow. Someone might disagree. Someone might challenge them. But for the first time, the possibility of remaining silent felt more painful than the possibility of being exposed. So they lifted their head, looked directly at the people waiting, and said your name. Not as a casual mention. Not as someone from the past. They said it with a tenderness that betrayed everything they had spent so long hiding. The reaction was immediate. One person looked genuinely stunned. Another person's expression changed as if dozens of unexplained moments suddenly made sense. Someone who had suspected something remained quiet, almost relieved that the truth had finally entered the room. But one person asked the question your soulmate had secretly feared, "After everything, you still feel that way?" Your soulmate could have softened their answer. They could have said they were confused. They could have claimed they were simply remembering old emotions. Instead, something courageous rose inside them. They answered, "More than I did before." Those words surprised even them. For months they had been measuring their feelings through fear, but once they spoke honestly, they realized the feeling had not weakened during the silence. It had matured. It had become less about fantasy and more about recognition. They had begun understanding not only that they wanted you, but why your presence had become so difficult to replace. Then they began talking about you in a way no one expected. They did not begin with your appearance. They did not describe superficial attraction. They spoke about your character. They talked about how you carried yourself through difficult moments. They remembered the times you remained gentle when you had every reason to become cold. They spoke about the way you could make people feel heard without needing attention for yourself. They admitted that you had challenged them without trying to control them. And then their voice softened when they said something that caused one person to look away emotionally. They made me feel like I didn't have to pretend all the time. That sentence exposed the real center of their love. Your soulmate was not only missing you. They were missing who they became when they felt safe enough to be genuine around you. Someone asked them why, if you meant that much, they had remained silent. That question struck deeper than anything else said that evening. Your soulmate stared downward because there was no answer that could make their hesitation look noble. They finally admitted that they had been afraid. Afraid of rejection. Afraid that they had misread the connection. Afraid of becoming emotionally dependent on something they could not control. Afraid that if they gave you the truth, you would gain the power to hurt them. But then they admitted something even harder. In trying to protect themselves from being hurt, they may have hurt you. They remembered their mixed signals. The moments when they pulled close and then disappeared emotionally. The times they expected you to understand feelings they had never clearly communicated. The occasions when pride stopped them from saying what their heart was screaming. And for the first time, they spoke about those mistakes without defending themselves. That was when someone at the gathering said, maybe they thought you didn't care. Your soulmate became completely still. Those words hit them differently because they had spent so much time asking whether you cared that they had rarely considered whether you knew they cared. Suddenly, they began seeing the story through your eyes. Imagine receiving warmth one moment and distance the next. Imagine sensing that someone feels something profound but watching them refuse to acknowledge it. Imagine wondering whether your own heart invented a connection that the other person was unwilling to name. Your soulmate finally understood that while they had been waiting for reassurance from you, you may have been waiting for the same reassurance from them. And this realization changed their expression so visibly that everyone around them noticed. They whispered, "I never thought about it like that." But there was more. One person who had remained silent until then finally spoke. This person had seen your soulmate during moments nobody else had witnessed. They had noticed the nights when your soulmate became unusually quiet. They had watched them open a message and stare at the screen without replying. They had heard your name mentioned casually and watched their entire mood change. This person looked directly at your soulmate and said, "You have been carrying this for a long time. Stop pretending this started tonight." Your soulmate did not deny it. Instead, their eyes became wet. And what happened next was the moment no one expected. Your soulmate admitted there had been nights when they had imagined what they would say if you suddenly appeared in front of them. They had rehearsed conversations privately. Sometimes they imagined apologizing. Sometimes they imagined simply telling you the truth. Sometimes they imagined you asking why they waited so long, and they never knew how they would answer. They admitted they had written messages they never sent. They had deleted words because vulnerability frightened them. They had checked their phone hoping for something from you while simultaneously refusing to be the person who reached out first. They laughed softly at their own contradiction, but there was pain underneath that laugh. They finally saw how pride had created the very distance they feared. Then someone asked, "Do you love them?" There was no hesitation this time, yes. One word. But it carried everything. The room became silent again, and your soulmate continued before anyone could interrupt. They said they loved the person you were, not merely the idea of having you. They said there were things about you they still did not completely understand, but strangely, that did not make them want to leave anymore. It made them want to know you more deeply. They said they had spent too long believing love was supposed to feel effortless and predictable. With you, they discovered something different. Love could be peaceful and terrifying at the same time because genuine connection required honesty. You did not simply make them feel desired. You made them want to grow. And then came the first surprise. Your soulmate revealed that they had compared every new connection with you. Not intentionally at first. It simply happened. Someone could be charming, yet something felt absent. Someone could offer attention, but it did not create the same sense of recognition. Someone could seem perfect on paper, yet your soulmate would leave the conversation feeling strangely empty. Eventually they realized they were searching for pieces of you in people who were never meant to become you. They were looking for your depth, your emotional presence, your particular way of making ordinary moments feel meaningful. And the harder they tried to convince themselves that someone else could replace the connection, the more obvious it became that replacement was never what their heart wanted. But even that was not the biggest confession. Someone asked your soulmate what they were most afraid of now. They expected your soulmate to say rejection. They did not. Your soulmate took a breath and answered, "That I waited too long." Those words changed everything. Because for the first time, they were no longer afraid primarily of loving you. They were afraid of losing the opportunity to love you honestly. They began imagining the possibility that while they were protecting their pride, you had been healing, growing, learning to live without answers. Perhaps becoming strong enough to stop waiting for someone who could not decide whether to speak. And that thought disturbed them more deeply than rejection ever had. My child, sometimes the heart changes when it realizes time does not belong to it. Your soulmate had unconsciously behaved as though the door would always remain open. As though you would always be there whenever they finally became courageous enough. But recently something made them question that assumption. Something about you had changed. Perhaps it was your silence. Perhaps the energy of your attention had shifted. Perhaps they sensed that you were no longer chasing clarity in the way you once did. Whatever they noticed, it awakened a realization inside them: you were not standing still. That realization became the fire behind the public confession. Your soulmate told everyone that they did not want to wait until you belonged to a completely different chapter of life before finally admitting you had mattered. They did not want to hear someday that you found happiness elsewhere and then spend years wondering what might have happened if they had been brave. They said something so vulnerable that even the person who had challenged them earlier became silent. If they choose someone else because I never told them the truth, I will have to live knowing I helped create that ending. There was no blame toward you. That was important. Your soulmate was beginning to accept responsibility for their own silence. Then one person asked the question that opened the deepest part of the evening, so what would you say if they were standing here right now? Your soulmate froze. Talking about you was one thing. Talking to an imaginary version of you was another. Everyone waited. At first, your soulmate looked uncomfortable, almost embarrassed. But the room had already heard too much truth for them to retreat. They closed their eyes briefly, and when they opened them again, something about their expression had changed. They were no longer speaking to the people around them. In their mind, they were speaking directly to you. They said they were sorry. Not a dramatic apology designed to erase everything. A simple, sincere apology for making you question what was real. They said they wished they had been brave enough to tell you that their distance was often fear, not indifference. They wished they had explained that when they became quiet, it was sometimes because they were overwhelmed by what they felt, not because you meant nothing. They admitted they should have trusted you with the truth instead of expecting you to decode their silence. Then their voice trembled. They said, "I hope they know I never forgot them." Someone in the room wiped their eyes. But your soulmate continued. They said there were days when they wanted to reach out simply to ask whether you were okay. There were nights when they wondered whether you were thinking about them too. They wondered whether you remembered the same moments they remembered. They wondered whether certain conversations lived inside you with the same intensity. And sometimes they wanted an answer so badly that they almost broke the silence, but fear would return at the last second. Then your soulmate admitted something nobody in that room knew. There was one specific moment when they almost came directly toward you. They had made up their mind. They had prepared what they wanted to say. They had even decided that regardless of your response, they would finally tell you the truth. But before they could do it, something happened. Something they saw. Something they heard. Something they misunderstood. And that single moment convinced them that perhaps you no longer wanted them in your life. For months, they carried that assumption as though it were fact. Yet during this public confession, someone asked them exactly what they had seen. Your soulmate explained. The moment they finished, one person immediately shook their head. "No," they said. "You understood that completely wrong." Your soulmate stared at them. The room became tense. They asked what they meant. And then this person revealed a detail your soulmate had never known. A detail connected directly to you. Suddenly, the event your soulmate had used as proof that you did not care began looking entirely different. Their face changed as the pieces rearranged themselves. The silence. The timing. Your behavior. The misunderstanding they had built an entire emotional wall around. It might never have meant what they thought it meant. Your soulmate leaned forward and asked the person to explain. The answer came slowly. And with every sentence, your soulmate realized they may have spent months running from a rejection that never actually happened. Their eyes filled with disbelief. "Then why didn't anyone tell me?" they asked. The person answered, "Because nobody knew you were in love with them." That sentence landed heavily. Your soulmate looked around the room and finally understood the cost of hiding everything. Nobody could help them understand a story they refused to tell. Nobody could correct assumptions they kept secret. Nobody could reassure them about a love they pretended did not exist. For the first time, the wall was completely down. And then your soulmate did something unexpected. They reached for their phone. Everyone watched. Someone asked what they were doing. Your soulmate looked at the screen, and for several seconds they said nothing. Your name was there. The possibility of finally crossing the distance was literally beneath their fingertips. Their heart was racing. Their hands were trembling slightly. All the courage they had shown while speaking publicly suddenly faced its real test. Because telling everyone they loved you was not the same as telling you. One required confession. The other required surrender. Your soulmate opened something connected to you and stared at it. Then they whispered, almost to themselves, "I should have done this a long time ago." Someone encouraged them. Another person told them not to act impulsively. Your soulmate remained still between those two voices, staring at the screen while their entire emotional history with you seemed to gather into a single decision. But before they could make it, a notification appeared. Your soulmate's expression changed instantly. They read something once. Then again. The person beside them noticed and asked, "What happened?" Your soulmate did not answer. Their face had gone completely still. Because what had just appeared on that screen was connected to you in a way nobody in the room had expected, and suddenly the confession they had made only minutes earlier was no longer the biggest revelation of the night. Something else had surfaced. Something that made your soulmate stand up, grip the phone more tightly, and say 6 words that left everyone staring at them in stunned silence. "I need to tell them tonight." The room remained completely silent after those 6 words left your soulmate's lips. "I need to tell them tonight." No one laughed. No one interrupted. Even the person who had warned them not to act impulsively could see that something fundamental had changed. Your soulmate was no longer speaking from excitement or from the temporary courage of a public confession. Something deeper had taken over. For months, perhaps longer, they had been asking themselves whether they should tell you how they felt. Now the question had changed. It was no longer whether they would tell you. It was how they could possibly explain everything they had kept hidden for so long. They stared at the phone in their hand, reading the notification again, and a strange mixture of relief, fear, tenderness, and regret moved across their face. Because what had appeared on that screen had confirmed something they had desperately wanted to believe but had been too afraid to trust. The story between you had not been as simple as they had convinced themselves it was. My child, stay close to this moment, because the confession you heard about in the beginning was only the doorway. Your soulmate had finally spoken your name publicly, admitted their love, and revealed that losing you frightened them more than loving you. But heaven was not finished uncovering the emotional truth of this story. There was another layer beneath their silence, one they had barely admitted even to themselves. Your soulmate had spent so much time believing they were protecting their heart that they had failed to recognize something important. The greatest pain they were carrying was not caused by you. It was caused by everything they had never allowed themselves to say. Every unsent message remained inside them. Every unfinished conversation stayed alive. Every moment when they wanted to reach toward you but chose pride instead became another invisible weight. And now, surrounded by people who finally knew the truth, those weights were becoming impossible to carry. Someone beside them gently asked what the notification said. Your soulmate hesitated. They were still processing it. The message itself was not some magical prediction or impossible certainty. It was something far more human, and therefore far more powerful. It contained information that challenged the assumption your soulmate had built their distance around. Remember the moment they believed proved you no longer cared? The moment they misunderstood and used as a reason to retreat? The notification connected back to that same situation. It suggested that what your soulmate had interpreted as rejection may actually have been you protecting yourself after believing they had already chosen distance. Two people had been looking at the same silence from opposite sides, each assuming the other had created it. That realization shook them. Your soulmate sat down again, although only moments earlier they had stood as though they were ready to leave immediately. Their eyes remained fixed on the screen. Someone asked if they were okay. They nodded, but everyone could see they were somewhere else emotionally. They were replaying the past with new information. Moments that had once seemed obvious suddenly became uncertain. Your silence no longer looked like indifference. Your distance no longer automatically meant rejection. Even certain words you had spoken began carrying another possible meaning. Your soulmate realized that perhaps while they were waiting for you to prove you cared, you had been waiting for them to stop hiding. Perhaps both hearts had been standing behind doors neither person wanted to open first. Then your soulmate whispered something that revealed how deeply the realization had reached them. What if I made them think they weren't important to me? No one answered immediately, because there are questions that cannot be softened with an easy response. One person finally said, "Maybe you did. But that doesn't mean you can't tell them the truth now." Your soulmate closed their eyes. That answer hurt because it was compassionate without pretending the past had been perfect. They could not return to every moment and choose differently. They could not erase confusion. They could not undo the nights when you may have questioned whether the connection existed only in your imagination. They could only decide who they would become from this moment forward. And something inside them chose honesty. Your soulmate began typing. The first sentence appeared, then disappeared. They tried again. Deleted it. Again. Deleted it. Someone smiled gently and said, "You're overthinking it." Your soulmate gave a nervous laugh, but they knew this was not simply a message. How could they compress everything into a few lines? How could they explain that they had missed you without making it sound casual? How could they admit they loved you without making the confession feel like pressure? How could they apologize without turning the apology into an excuse? Most importantly, how could they tell you the truth while still respecting whatever truth now lived inside your heart? That last question changed everything. Because earlier versions of your soulmate had wanted certainty before vulnerability. They wanted to know you would respond positively before risking honesty. But the person sitting there now was beginning to understand that genuine love could not be offered as a transaction. They could tell you what they felt, but they could not demand that you feel the same. They could explain their silence, but they could not insist that you erase whatever pain it caused. They could open the door, but they could not force you to walk through it. Strangely, accepting this did not weaken their courage. It strengthened it. For the first time, their confession was becoming less about controlling the outcome and more about finally giving you the truth you deserved. They put the phone down. Everyone looked confused. "Changed your mind?" someone asked. Your soulmate shook their head. "No. I just don't want to hide behind a perfect message anymore." That sentence surprised the room. The person who had spent months hiding was suddenly rejecting another hiding place. Your soulmate realized they had been trying to create words polished enough to protect them from vulnerability. But there was no perfect arrangement of sentences that could guarantee your reaction. So they decided that when they spoke to you, whether through a sincere message or eventually face-to-face, they wanted the words to sound like themselves. Imperfect. Honest. Unprotected. Then one person asked what they wanted you to know first. Your soulmate thought carefully. Not, "I miss you." Not even, "I love you." Their answer was, "I want them to know they weren't imagining it." The room became quiet again. Those words carried the weight of every uncertain moment between you. Your soulmate understood that one of the hardest parts of their silence may have been leaving you alone with questions. They wanted you to know that the connection had affected them too. The moments you remembered, they remembered. The energy you sensed, they felt. The conversations that lingered in your mind had often lingered in theirs. When they pulled away, it was not proof that nothing existed. Sometimes it was evidence that what existed had become more emotionally intense than they knew how to handle. But your soulmate was careful with what came next. They did not want to romanticize their mistakes. Fear could explain silence, but it could not magically make silence harmless. They admitted this openly. "I should have communicated," they said. "They shouldn't have had to guess." That was one of the strongest things they had said all evening, because love without accountability easily becomes another beautiful excuse. Your soulmate was beginning to understand that if they truly wanted a future different from the past, feelings alone would not be enough. They would need consistency. Courage after the confession. Honesty when conversations became uncomfortable. Patience if you needed time. Respect if you had boundaries. Love would need to become behavior. And this is where the people around them saw something they had not expected. Your soulmate was not simply emotional about you. They were changing because of what they finally admitted. One person who had previously doubted whether this connection was healthy or serious asked, "What happens if they don't answer the way you hope?" Your soulmate became silent again, but this time they did not retreat into fear. They took a breath and said, "Then I respect that. But at least they will finally know the truth." That answer stunned someone. Months earlier, your soulmate would never have said it. They would rather have kept silent forever than risk hearing an answer they could not control. Now they understood something painful but liberating: rejection was not the only way to lose someone. Silence could lose them too. Pride could lose them. Delay could lose them. Pretending could lose them. And perhaps the greatest regret would not be hearing a difficult answer. It would be never giving love the opportunity to hear an honest question. But then another person asked something nobody had considered. What exactly are you hoping happens after you tell them? Your soulmate looked away. This was where the conversation became even more personal. They had thought about this more than anyone knew. They did not immediately speak about marriage, promises, or some perfect future. Instead, they described something surprisingly simple. They wanted one honest conversation with you. No games. No disappearing. No coded messages. No pretending not to care. They wanted to sit with you and hear what the experience had been like from your side. They wanted to understand the moments they had misread. They wanted to explain the moments you may have misread. They wanted to know whether the connection still had somewhere to go, but they also wanted to know the truth even if the truth was complicated. Then they said something softer. I want to hear their voice when they know I finally stopped running. That sentence carried a tenderness that changed the atmosphere. For a moment, nobody spoke. Your soulmate's eyes moved toward the window. Their mind was somewhere with you now. They imagined your reaction. Would you become quiet? Would you be surprised? Would you ask why it took so long? Would you believe them? Would you protect yourself because you had heard too many uncertain signals before? Every possibility frightened them, but beneath the fear was something stronger: readiness. They were finally ready to be known. And that is when an older person in the room, someone who had listened more than they had spoken, said something your soulmate would remember for a very long time. They told your soulmate that love is not proven by how dramatically someone confesses it. It is proven by what they do after the emotion settles. Anyone can become courageous for one evening. The real question is whether they can remain honest tomorrow, next week, and during the difficult conversations that follow. Your soulmate absorbed every word. Because they knew the person was right. A public confession might be memorable, but you deserved more than a memorable moment. You deserved clarity that did not vanish the next morning. You deserved communication that did not appear only when fear of losing you became unbearable. If your soulmate wanted to enter your life differently, they would need to arrive differently. And then they made another decision. They would not approach you with pressure. They would not tell you that destiny required you to choose them. They would not use spiritual language to remove your freedom. They would not demand immediate forgiveness because they had finally found courage. They would simply offer the truth and allow you to decide what that truth meant for you. Something peaceful entered their expression when they reached this conclusion. It was strange. They were still nervous, yet for the first time their nervousness was no longer fighting against action. Fear was present, but it was no longer in control. They picked up the phone again. This time, they did not begin typing immediately. They opened an old conversation. Your conversation. And suddenly, Everything became quiet inside them. They scrolled slowly. There were messages they had not read in months. Small exchanges that seemed ordinary at the time now carried extraordinary emotional weight. A joke. A question. A moment of concern. A simple good night. Words that had once passed quickly now looked like pieces of a story neither of you fully understood while living through it. Then your soulmate reached one particular message. They stopped. Their face changed. They read it again. The people around them could tell something had happened, but no one wanted to interrupt. That message contained a sentence from you that your soulmate had completely misunderstood when it was originally sent. At the time, they read it through fear. They assumed you were closing a door. But after everything revealed that evening, the words looked different. Maybe you had not been closing the door. Maybe you had been asking whether they were willing to open it. Your soulmate covered their mouth with one hand. "How did I miss this?" they whispered. And suddenly, another memory surfaced. A conversation that occurred shortly after that message. Something you said. Something they answered poorly. Something that may have become the turning point where both of you began retreating. Your soulmate remembered your expression. They remembered the slight change in your tone. At the time, they told themselves you were simply becoming distant. Now they wondered whether they had watched your heart protect itself in real time. That thought broke something open inside them. Not hopelessness. Understanding. For the first time, your soulmate could see that the story was not about one person refusing to love and another person waiting. It was about two human beings carrying fears, assumptions, hopes, and unspoken needs into the same connection. Neither of you had possessed the entire picture. Your soulmate's eyes filled with tears. They whispered your name. And then they said, "I wish I could tell them I understand now." Someone answered, "Then tell them." Your soulmate looked at the phone. This time they began writing without deleting every sentence. They wrote that there was something they had needed to say for a long time. They acknowledged that their silence may have been confusing. They admitted they had allowed fear to make decisions for them. They said they did not expect anything from you immediately, but they no longer wanted you to believe that you had meant nothing. Then they stopped. Because the next sentence was the sentence they had spent all evening approaching. 3 words waited inside them. Simple words. Terrifying words. They typed them. "I love you." Your soulmate stared at the screen. There it was. No audience could protect them now. No explanation could make the vulnerability smaller. They had said those words publicly, but seeing them addressed directly toward you made their heart pound harder than the entire confession before the room. Their finger hovered near the screen. Someone beside them whispered, "Are you ready?" Your soulmate nodded. But before they could send anything, they noticed something beneath the old conversation that they had overlooked. A detail. A date. Something that immediately connected with another event from the past. Your soulmate's eyes widened. They scrolled upward quickly. Then downward. They checked another message. Then another. The person beside them asked what they had found. Your soulmate did not answer. Because they were suddenly realizing that the misunderstanding between you had begun earlier than they thought. Much earlier. There had been another person involved in one crucial conversation, not necessarily romantically, but someone whose words had influenced what your soulmate believed about you. At the time, your soulmate trusted what they heard. They never asked you directly. They never verified it. They simply carried the information into every interaction that followed. Now, looking at the timeline, something did not fit. The dates contradicted the story they had been told. Your soulmate sat forward. Their expression changed from sadness to intense concentration. They opened another old message and compared it with what they remembered being told. It still did not fit. Someone asked again, "What's wrong?" Your soulmate finally looked up. "I think someone gave me the wrong idea about them." The room became silent. Not because anyone wanted drama, but because everyone understood what this could mean. One unverified assumption may have influenced months of hesitation. Your soulmate had believed something about your intentions without ever giving you the chance to explain yourself. But rather than becoming angry, your soulmate became deeply reflective. They realized the larger lesson immediately. Even if someone had given them inaccurate information, they had still chosen not to communicate with you. They had allowed another person's interpretation to become louder than your own voice. If they wanted something genuine with you now, that could never happen again. They put the unsent confession aside for a moment. There was something they needed to understand first. They searched further through the old timeline. And then they found it. A message from the exact day everything had begun changing. Your soulmate read the timestamp. Read the words. Then read them again. Their breathing slowed. Because the message proved that on the day they believed you had deliberately turned away from them, you had actually been trying to reach them. They had missed it. Not metaphorically. Literally missed it. Your soulmate stared at the screen as the entire room waited. And then their eyes filled again. "You tried," they whispered toward the phone as though you could hear them. "You actually tried." Something inside them finally understood why your energy had changed afterward. You may not have simply walked away. You may have become tired of knocking on a door that never opened. Your soulmate leaned back, overwhelmed by the realization. They no longer wanted to send a dramatic declaration. They wanted to send something truer. They erased part of the message. Not the love. Not the apology. Only the words that sounded too rehearsed. Then they began again. This time, they wrote from the place they had spent so long avoiding. They told you they finally understood something they should have understood much earlier. They told you they were sorry for assuming instead of asking. They told you they did not know what your heart felt now, and they would respect whatever answer you gave. And then they wrote the sentence that made their hands tremble. "But if there is still even a small part of you that wants the truth from me, I am finally ready to give you all of it." They stared at those words. Their finger moved toward send. The entire room seemed to disappear around them. For your soulmate, there was only you, the message, and the distance between the life they had been living and the life that might begin after one act of courage. Then, just before they pressed send, their phone lit up again. This time, it was not another notification about the past. It was something happening now. Your soulmate looked at the screen. Their face went completely still. Someone beside them immediately asked, "Is that them?" Your soulmate slowly lifted their eyes. And the answer they gave changed the entire direction of the night. Because after months of wondering whether they would ever have the courage to reach you, something had just happened that nobody in that room could have predicted. Your soulmate looked down at your name glowing on the screen and whispered, "They're reaching out to me."